Well, it's great to have Andrew Dunn with me today. Thank you so much for coming in. And first of all, huge congratulations on your very well-deserved MBE for services to wildlife conservation. So Andrew, let's kick off by just tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in this area of conservation?
Thank you, thanks. I've worked in wildlife conservation in Africa since 1989. I worked actually for voluntary service overseas, VSO, in Liberia. On a large mammal survey. Unfortunately, that was cut short due to the civil war, but I managed to get other jobs building on that experience in Cote d'Ivoire, in Kenya, and then I got a job with WWF UK in Taraba State in Nigeria, in Gashaka-Gumti National Park in 1992. And since then, I've more or less been based in Nigeria. I currently work for the Wildlife Conservation Society, who are based in New York in the US. So, yes, it's been a great journey, and I really like Nigeria, and there's some positive developments despite all the difficulties.
Well, that makes two of us, and I'm also very passionate about wildlife conservation, and I'm looking forward to visit you in Calabar, which is where I understand you're based now.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your work in Calabar specifically.
Yes, thank you. Yes, our focus has been always on the cross-river gorilla. So WCS exists to protect endangered species and the wild places where they live. So we focus on cross-river gorillas, West African lions, of which Nigeria has 2 endangered populations, Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzees, and forest elephants and savanna elephants. So Cross River National Park is our key site, and we're working in collaboration with Takamanda National Park and Korup National Park in Cameroon to make it a transboundary conservation effort, and focusing on the Cross River gorilla, which is the rarest of 4 gorilla subspecies in Africa. And we've worked on that gorilla conservation for about 20 years. And the positive news is that there's been no gorillas killed now for a number of years. So we're hoping, it's very difficult to know how many gorillas are remaining, but roughly 100 in Nigeria and 200 across the border in Cameroon. So still very low numbers, but with very low or zero poaching, we hope that that population is stabilised or perhaps even increased.
That's really good news. So what's the key to the conservation? How have you managed to stop the poaching?
That's always the key issue, by strengthening law enforcement, so working with the Nigerian National Park Service, who are our main partner in the country, focusing on ranger training, making sure rangers are more disciplined, more motivated, and field equipment, uniforms, making sure they can go out on patrol, not just for a few hours, but for a week at a time. And also working with communities to try and provide alternative livelihoods. So hunting and bushmeat is a major source of income in many protected areas in Nigeria. So working with hunters, perhaps to give some support for cocoa farming or other issues like that. We're also working with local schools to promote conservation education, raise awareness, and try and build conservation champions for the future. So it has a multifaceted approach for conservation, and it has been working. Yes.
Brilliant. I mean, from my experience working in other countries, all of these issues matter, but the livelihoods bit is ultimately the key if someone's going to turn from a life of poaching. Yes. So does cocoa, for example, provide a viable alternative to poaching?
Cocoa in Cross River State is the main source of income. It still fetches a good price, although farmers don't always get as much as they should for the cocoa crop, but it's the main source of income. Unfortunately, at the same time, cocoa is also the main source of deforestation. So we've been trying to work to improve livelihoods and raise levels of income, but making sure that the cocoa is not planted in rainforest or inside the national park. So the approach we've taken is to identify existing old cocoa farms which become unproductive, and then provide farmers with new seedlings, improved seedlings, and to replant old farms. So it reduces the incentive to create new farms and cutting down more forest.
And what's the market for the cocoa? Is that domestic or international?
I think almost all Nigeria's cocoa is exported. I do see a little bit now. There's some small companies in Nigeria producing chocolate, but most of it goes out to Europe and the US.
Fantastic. So there does seem to be a viable pathway forward. I mean, if this continues to do well, what would be your aspiration for actually growing the population of these rare gorillas?
Yes, that's a good point. So the crossover gorillas are in 3 separate populations. The immediate goal is to stabilise those populations, reduce hunting, but long term what we need to do is to ensure that the 3 populations are connected genetically, so to protect the corridors. That's possibly even a more difficult problem even than educating hunters. We need to stop the illegal logging going on and the illegal farming and protect corridors.
So that means working with Cameroon. I understand there is a transboundary framework that's being developed. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we've been working for about 20 years with Cameroon authorities and with the national parks, as many of the national parks are right on the border. So the forests are contiguous. And obviously the crossover gorillas and the forest elephants especially are moving backwards and forwards. So it's essential that we work very closely with the Cameroon authorities. So there's a framework agreement between Nigeria and Cameroon covering all the protected areas, right from Cross River State right up to Lake Chad National Park. So the whole border, there's a number of protected areas. And that's, we're hoping there's been some progress made. We hope it might be signed later this year. We're also working with Cameroon to establish a transboundary World Heritage Site. That's working with UNESCO to provide extra awareness for the site, but extra level of protection as well.
I mean, is it a realistic aspiration to do what Rwanda's done so well, to create a tourism opportunity around these rare gorillas and forest elephants and so on?
We would like to. Certainly that the gorilla tourism industry, based on the mountain gorilla in Rwanda, has been spectacularly successful. It generates great revenue for the country and the gorilla population. Because there's such high value to the country, they're very well protected and the gorilla population there is expanding. Yes, long term, it's been discussed for a number of years, should we habituate the gorillas in Nigeria like they are in Rwanda, so they're not afraid of tourists, so tourists can go and see them. The problem with the gorillas in Cross River State is that there is still some level of hunting, and the gorillas have managed to survive by hiding out on the very tops of the mountains where hunters can't go, and if you worked with the gorillas to lose their fear of humans, they'd be a lot more susceptible to hunting. So perhaps it might be possible to try it in, say, one pilot site, but it needs to be done very carefully and cautiously.
Yes, so it's getting that balance right and making sure that the government genuinely is committed to the tourism rather than the opportunities that arise from poaching, because obviously sometimes we see law enforcement themselves benefiting, frankly, from some of the illegal activity. So just looking briefly then at your other project in Taraba, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we've been working, it's a site I know quite well, Gashaka Gumti National Park, and I worked in the 90s for WWF UK, and we're working with a partner, African Nature Investors, who have an agreement with the National Park Service, similar to how we work in Cross River National Park and Yankari Game Reserve, providing support to the Park Service to revitalise, to strengthen the management of Gashaka Gumti National Park, and encouraging links with the protected areas on the Cameroon side, Faro National Park and others.
And what sort of wildlife do we find in Taraba?
Taraba has a large population of the critically endangered Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzee. Again, there are 4 Cameroon subspecies in Africa, and the Nigerian-Cameroon one is the most endangered. So there's a good population, partly because it's a very remote habitat, mountains, gallery forest, but also it's mainly surrounded by a Muslim population who are non-primate eaters. So primates, Gashaka Gumti National Park is quite a haven for primates.
So there isn't a poaching problem there?
There's a poaching problem, but perhaps less so than areas further south, like Cross River National Park. So there is some poaching,
but not as bad. And is there also an alternative livelihood work going on there?
I believe so, yes. One of the issues, obviously cocoa's not grown there, it's not wet enough, but they're working with women to develop shea butter, which again has a good export potential to Europe and elsewhere.
Fantastic. And then just finally bringing it back to the Nigeria federal level. So one positive development is there's a new illegal wildlife strategies just come out, sort of an end-to-end approach, which will tackle, for example, pangolins as well, another tragic decimation of the population. I mean, what are your thoughts on the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that the right legal frameworks are in place, the right policies are in place to ensure we can protect and conserve the wildlife?
Yes. I mean, the illegal wildlife trade strategy document, it's very impressive and encouraging that the federal government has taken that lead, working with UNODC and others to produce that document. I think it's good to see so many Nigerian agencies coming together, the Federal Minister of Environment, but also Customs and Nesria and the Park Service. So sitting around together, see how people can work together to tackle the illegal wildlife trade. And helped, of course, by some NGOs like ourselves, WCS and EIA and Focus Conservation and others. Because obviously there's a serious problem with illegal wildlife trade in Nigeria. A lot of it being sourced from other countries, from Cameroon and Gabon and Congo, and being routed through Nigeria's borders. So we really need to tackle that.
Brilliant. So it seems from what you're saying, it's a combination of getting the federal structures right, the legal frameworks, the policy frameworks, but ultimately working with communities on the ground so they see the value coming from these wonderful creatures that are so important to preserve for the future.
Yes. And Nigeria still has. I mean, a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that Nigeria still has lions.
Indeed.
We still have elephants, we still have gorillas, chimpanzees, and areas like Cross River National Park got thousands of species of butterflies. So there's a lot of diversity in Nigeria that we need to protect.
It's so unknown, I agree, and I think, just to finish, I think I'd love to see the tourism potential opened up, and I'm certainly going to take you up on your offer to come to visit the national parks. But it needs quite a lot of infrastructure, including proper accommodation and flights and so on, and insecurity in Nigeria is a problem. But I do think that Rwanda model should be what we try and aspire to in Nigeria, given the wonderful wildlife that still exists here.
No, exactly, yes.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for talking to us today, and congratulations again on your wonderful work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.